I was working the night shift somewhere around the Christmas period last year at a factory that had their yearly 2 weeks closing time. My work consisted of doing at least 4 rounds around and in the buildings every night to make sure that everything was in order. The place wasn't that huge, so one round took about half an hour. Other than that, it was just sitting around doing absolutely nothing by the front gate inside of a lodge. I downloaded about 5 to 6 movies to my phone before every shift to get me through the night. I remember it being the 18th of December when this happened. I started my first patrol with looping around the building, shining my flashlight around to see if anything would be out of the place. Nothing seemed to have happened, so I entered the administrative building. It was a 2-story building with extremely long but extremely narrow hallways. Every round, I started with a 2nd story, checked every workspace and checked behind every door. Everything checked out fine. Mind you, we were not allowed to turn on the lights inside of the building. 1st story, same routine. There was this one large workspace with about 10 desks that I always checked last. I remember every desk having a calendar that employees could write appointments and whatnot on. And seeing as this took place in the Christmas period, it goes without saying that there were Christmas ornaments everywhere. I was done checking the building and everything seemed fine. Fast forward about 3 hours later. I started my 2nd round around the premises. Everything was fine. Entered the administrative building. 2nd floor was just fine. 1st floor was just fine, and I only needed to check out one more large workspace. Upon entering, my blood ran absolutely cold. There was one of the desk calendars in the middle of the workspace floor, and around it were some shattered Christmas ornaments. I was being extremely cautious and hesitant with choosing my next move. As any security guard would do, I picked up the mess in the complete darkness and started checking for drafts, signs of break-ins, signs of forced entry. After a search of the complete building, I came up with absolutely nothing to explain how this could have happened. I left the administrative building and walked towards my little safe haven lodge next to the gate and wrote a report, counting down every single minute until I had to do my 3rd round. Ever since I ran into that calendar and those shattered ornaments, I finished every search of that particular building in less than 10 minutes for the remaining 2 weeks I had the night shift. A little over a year ago, I had a job working overnight at a gas station close to my house. I'm a woman and I was 31 at the time. I know, to some it seems unsafe for a woman to work a graveyard shift by herself. However, it was a slow store and the sheriff's office was about 20 feet across from it. I really didn't think I would have that many problems. There would be about 30 customers in an 8-hour shift, and that was on busier nights. It was about 3:30 in the morning. I went outside to sweep the parking lot and last minute checked the trash. It was time for a cigarette and I had one headphone in and I was kind of jamming out. Across the road in the parking lot of the sheriff's office, I saw a figure with his back to me. He was swaying back and forth while looking down. Honestly, it looked like he was enjoying a much needed piss. Against the sheriff's office though? Yeah, the building closed at 4 p.m. and didn't open again until 6 in the morning. By the back of his ripped white t-shirt, I remembered that he had come in about 4 hours earlier. He was a total creep, and I could tell that he already had a good buzz going. I didn't say anything. I just took my eyes off of him and tried not to draw attention to myself. It was working until a car pulled in. I was still outside as they pulled up. I saw him look at the car and then back at me and back and forth. As the customer was leaving, I walked her outside. I still had half a smoke burning and I left my dustpan outside with the squeegee. We both heard him start to swear angrily and seemingly engage in an argument with himself. She looked across the road and told me to be careful. I made an awkward joke about him being the one who should be more afraid of me or something like that. The man was still there, but closer to the road now facing the parking lot of my store. Whatever he's yelling was completely unintelligible. He was obviously very drunk and can barely stand straight, still swaying away. I didn't engage him, but I didn't take my eyes off him at this time. I just slowly walked back into the store. Something about his face really bothered me. It had a darkness to it, but his eyes looked wild. My experience during graveyard jobs had been that crazy-eyed ones were usually the worst. I didn't like it at all, and I wanted no part of it. I still had almost 3 hours to go and 2 before any other employees got there. Instantly, I went to the computer and typed up a temporarily closed sign just in case he wanted trouble. I was coming around the counter on my way to the doors when I saw that he'd walked across the road to my side now. I literally just barely got the second door locked when he stumbled into our very small parking lot. My hand mimed the hand signal for cut across my neck, basically saying, "Nope, you can't come in here, we're closed." I shook my head back and forth too, hoping to further discourage him. He started walking away but screamed something at me while he was walking. I don't mean he was grumpy and shouted at me or yelled that I was an asshole or anything. I mean like he was at an enraged volume and was violently throwing his hands everywhere. Definitely knowing I'm in the wrong shift of the job, I got really skeeved out. I decided to call the cops. It's a good thing too, because the minute I hung up with them, there he comes again up to the door. He started pulling and banging on it. He backs up and runs into it, trying to ram it open. Not that it would have done any good anyway. I made the mistake of telling him that I had called the cops and his ass was about to be grass. I say I made the mistake of telling him because once I said that, he took off. The police never found him. They drove around the road and surrounding neighborhoods for over an hour but found no one. He was on foot, so I don't get where he could have gone to. He didn't harm me, and with them not finding him, I didn't fill out a police report or anything. I was safe behind thick glass doors that were locked for the rest of my shift. It just sucked. Maybe if I didn't warn him ahead of time, I wouldn't have to spend the last 3 months of my job constantly looking over my shoulder. I'll never know what the right choice was, but I'm glad I just don't work there anymore. In the second half of 1998, I had taken a job as a security guard at a plant that made locks. Being relatively young, I usually worked one of 3 shifts, 4 p.m. to 12 a.m., 7:30 p.m. to 3:30 a.m., or 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. The 7:30 to 3:30 shift was for extra coverage, so there was always 2 of us there from 7:30 to midnight. It was a routine, boring job for the most part. We did our rounds, logged anything out of the ordinary, and watched a tiny monitor displaying the CCTV feed. Things went by in an almost painfully normal manner for about 6 months. I worked, saved, bought a car, and planned a move. By late March of '99, I served my notice and prepared to head cross-country. A new hire was brought in to fill my spot, a soft-spoken man named Calvin. As part of his training, Calvin spent time working at all hours. At night, he was a shadow, working with myself and the other night guard, getting a feel for the plant's nocturnal routines. Most nights, he worked with myself and Amira, a female guard who was around my age. I was 18 at the time. Calvin, who was about a decade older, was quiet and polite, though something seemed to be missing. There's a spark that genuinely nice people seem to have, and he didn't possess it. Whenever he went on rounds with me, he'd ask questions about the job and make small talk. I noticed that he was a little odd, laughing at odd times and changing his tone mid-sentence. At the time, I chalked it up to him being awkward. That wouldn't last. One night, nearing the end of his first week, he went on rounds with Amira. When they returned to the office, I knew something was wrong. Normally talkative, she would barely say a word. Not sure what had occurred, but I waited until Calvin had gone to the restroom to ask. During their trip, everything had been normal until they reached the brass mill, a portion of the plant that shut down at 6 p.m. There was usually no employees there after that time and no lights. They were making their way to a checkpoint on a landing atop a flight of stairs when the mood suddenly shifted. She told me that she turned around only to find out that he was right on her. Startled, she backed against the grating at the end of the landing and he leaned in towards her, his face nearly touching hers. He flirted in a low voice, and when she mentioned his wedding band, he said it would be over soon. From then on, I did the rounds, taking Calvin with me each time. The night ended without further incidents, and I left a note for our supervisor detailing what had occurred. The next night came and went with no Calvin. I did the rounds while Amira stayed in the locked office. Same thing the night after. Then on my second to last shift, I come in to find her freaking out. She found out why Calvin hadn't been at work. He had been arrested for murdering his wife. She had been dismembered and burnt, parts of her body placed in a pond less than a mile from where we worked. That night and the next, Amira called the jail just to make sure they were still holding him. Based on the time frame, he had killed his wife months before he started the job.